Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shannon Durehove. Welcome to today's webinar on intermodal transport, enhancing intercontinental and international trade, hosted on behalf of Transport Evolution Africa. Global trade is facing rising instability with tariff wars and growing tensions between major powers. As established trade rules come under threat, how should Africa respond? In this webinar, the panelists will explore where transport infrastructure investment is most needed, how trade blocs can boost regional and international trade, and how intermodal transport systems can unlock Africa's trade potential in a shifting global landscape. Before we get started, please note that the chat and the Q&A are available to you. Please post your questions in the Q&A and your comments in the chat. Both the Q&A and the chat are at the bottom of your screen. Please be aware that we're recording this webinar and we'll send the recording to you when it's available. We're also streaming the webinar live on YouTube and we'll share the link in the chat once it's available. So let's get started. Today's moderator is Joshua Low, Vice President South Africa at DMG Events. He builds and leads teams, creates strategies, develops innovative ideas and new opportunities that have proven to result in growth, achievement of sales targets, and profitability. Josh will facilitate the discussion with today's panel, which consists of Nikita Reddy, the National Commercial Manager at DCP Group, Peter Vandel, CEO of the NEPAD Business Foundation, and Louise Wiggett, the founder and CEO of Global Trade Solution. I'll hand over now to moderator Josh Low to start the discussion. Over to you, Josh.
Thank you, Shannon, and welcome to my esteemed panel who'll be joining me on this conversation today. So again, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. It's great to see so many people on this webinar. We've got just over 50 people who've joined so far. Welcome to our webinar on intermodal transport, enhancing intercontinental and international trade. We're delighted to have you join us today as we explore a topic that's crucial for the future of global trade and dealing with some of the challenges we face. In an era where global trade dynamics are increasingly uncertain, with tariff wars and trade insecurities challenging established norms, it is imperative that we address these issues proactively. The question we face today is whether the globally accepted trade rules, which have governed international trade practices for decades, are being overshadowed by these emerging challenges, and what the impact of these changes will have on international trade in the future. As we turn our focus towards Africa, the continent's growing emphasis on self-reliance and intra-African trade is more relevant than ever. For Africa to thrive in intercontinental trade, significant improvements in transport infrastructure and robust investment in intermodal transport and logistics are essential, as well as significant improvements in efficiencies across supply chains. Such developments will not only facilitate the easing of trade barriers, but will also enhance the ease of trade both within the continent and on an international stage. So with that as a backdrop, I'd like to get straight into the webinar, and we're going to start today's session. As Shannon was mentioning, if you've got questions, please put them in the Q&A box. We will have a Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. If you've got comments, please use the chat function. And as an introduction, I'm just going to call on my panelists just to do some opening remarks in terms of their views on this topic. So maybe Nikita, if you're comfortable, I can start with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Joshua, for the introduction. And thank you once again to the Transport Evolution Africa for making these webinars possible, along with Engineering News and Creamer Media. Just as a start, such a crucial time for us to be having this discussion with all of the changes that are happening globally, be it trade wars or closed off port infrastructure because of the political risks at the moment. It's really a critical time for us to be having these kind of discussions and also brainstorming on ways that we can look and kind of divert from all of these things that we really don't have control over. So in essence, really just to highlight the highs and the lows of these. Many people look at it as quite a negative thing, but it depends on your angle, really. So I'm really looking forward to an engaging conversation today with the rest of the panelists and sharing some of my insights.
Thank you, Nikita. Over to you, Louise.
Thank you very much, Joshua, Nikita, and the Transport Evolution team. It's great to be part of the panel. Nikita, you're spot on. You didn't mention the dreaded name, but I think the Trump factor at the moment, we were in our preparation meeting yesterday, said we should start this event with having an atom bomb exploding because that's what we're actually dealing with at the moment. From day to day, the trade environment can change dramatically. And it was quite interesting this morning listening to a panel discussion around what the impact is just on the shipping to America. And if the decision is made that the shipping and the tariffs will be postponed, how long it will take to actually realign and get the shipping process flow happening again, which will be anything from 2 to 6 weeks. So we are dealing in an environment at the moment that is very volatile. Not just internationally, but also on our continent. There's a lot of things happening here. So I think from our side, this discussion is really on the point, and thank you for the invitation. Happy to be part of the panel and look forward to an interesting discussion and also lots of questions from the audience. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And thanks, Louise. I mean, it was interesting. I was watching CNN last night. They were talking about is it blank sailing when there's cargo ship trips that are cancelled, and they said they were up something like 40% over the last month, 30% the month before. So it's already starting to have a significant impact on international trade. Peter, over to you. You're on mute. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much. Just to echo Nikita's thanks to the organizers. It's great to be involved, and thanks for inviting us to participate. I'm Peter Van Dal. I'm the CEO of the NEPAD Business Foundation, an organization that's been around just for over a couple of decades, really trying to build the African economies. We'll get into details a little bit later, but it's always been our view that to grow the African economy, transport, logistics, and the efficiency of trade is critical as an enabler to reducing the cost of trade, which will obviously allow buyers to have more food affordability, which allows sellers to sell more goods. And that's always been our drive. And this topic is really all about that and the work that we've been involved in for a number of years. So we look forward to digging into detail shortly.
Great. Thank you all for those great welcome remarks. So I think we'll get straight into the Q&A session. And I'm going to start the first question and ask Louise and Nikita to comment. So what is the impact on the transport and logistics sector of the current trade wars waged by global superpowers? Nikita, would you like to go first?
Sure, and I know Louise will back me up here. Thank you so much for the question. So at the moment, it's really just causing a disruption to the supply chain of so many of the exporters and the shippers worldwide. Many of the shippers are forced to re-look at their supply chains, their current manufacturing locations worldwide. I mean, you can imagine the majority of imports and exports worldwide come from China, as an example. This has caused a huge shift in the focus of supply chain professionals globally, having to look at new markets, new locations to source their products from. And that's not necessarily easy. You have a history of, costing, etc. You build supplier relationships. So it's also a little bit more challenging to the end user, which is the consumer. And I think that we don't really shed enough light on how it affects the day-to-day person, right? It's also increased the cost of transportation. So you're now having to look at routes that are probably not more common, the shipping price tends to be fluctuated in those regions, right? So it's really just forced everybody to look outside of the box. And for many of the shippers, it's also closed trade lanes for them. As an example, with the political climate, if you are shipping into Mozambique, the likelihood of your goods coming or getting to where they need to go was very slim at a specific point in this year. And I love the fact that you brought up the blank sailings. The shipping lines are finding that it's more difficult to call on specific ports because you have an increased risk of piracy, as an example. So you have the risk of cargo theft, you have the risk of your fleet being burnt, and you can imagine it's not exactly the same as replacing a little pen on your desk. It's a vessel, as an example. So the shipping lines themselves are having to relook at their legislation, their risk procedures, their insurance, etc. And it comes at a cost to the end user. We just don't see it, when we're buying our products, etc. So it's really forced us to look outside of the box. And as logistics providers, it's also created the need for us to become innovative thinkers, to look at ways that we can start staging cargo for our customers. And I'm not trying to sell the company that I am employed by, but DCP, warehousing has now become a thing of, it's a necessity. Customers are having to shift as quick as the market changes. I mean, one day we were happily doing business with the United States, and then the next we all trying to figure out where we stand. So it's really forced us to look at other means of doing business. And Louise, you can emphasize and add to that if you'd like.
No, thank you, Nikita. I think you've touched on all the major points around this, but I think just a few points that I want to add is that with uncertainty in the supply chain, it has got a direct correlation to cost. And we can refer back to our experiences with COVID. We had this uncertainty: can we ship, can't we ship, must we warehouse, must we not warehouse? And that drove the cost up substantially. I think COVID feels far away, but for those of us that were or have been in the industry, we know what happened to the shipping rates. We know what happened to the disruption. And, excuse me, we seem to be going back into that kind of COVID scenario where I want to really call it that you've got to be twinkle toes. You've got to be very, very agile. And also, very importantly, make very quick decisions, because you do not have the time to actually linger along. Nikita has touched on warehousing. I think that's a factor that's going to be a very big role. Again, Joshua, we seem to be listening to the same broadcaster, but very interesting interview yesterday on CNN with bonded warehouses, which virtually died in America. The people were going out of business. What is happening now is that suddenly the demand for bonded warehouses have gone through the roof, because people have realized I can put my stuff into a bonded warehouse and delay paying this higher duties. If the decision is then made to bring the duties down, I can actually leverage a bit of the cost structure. But then that loops back to costing, because how on earth do you cost in this particular scenario? How do you know what your landed cost is going to be? And it is really this uncertainty that is going to challenge us. And I think the second important point is it's going to challenge us for longer than we anticipate, because this ripple effect that's coming through now is probably going to impact us for the next, I would say, 18 months to 2 years. Very important thing also is around looking at market switching. The South African citrus industry is a good example. We can't say to the oranges, oh, sorry, oranges, you must stop growing now and getting ripe. We are leading up to the peak of the citrus industry. So the citrus industry had to be twinkle toes and find other markets, and that's not easy. I mean, there's specific people that have developed product ranges only for America. Now, we've ordered cartons, you've ordered all sorts of things. You've done all your planning, you've done all your costing. Now suddenly, there's a duty slapped on it, and by the looks of it, what's coming out now, some restrictions coming in. So where do you move these goods? Good example is, China switched most of their markets and suppliers suddenly to Australia. Unbelievable how they've done that. Again, another example is Apple that's moved their business from China to India. This all happened within the space of 4 to 5 weeks. So I think this is what we're going to need. Nikita, amplifying what you're saying, we're going to have to be nimble. We're going to have to think on our feet, and we're going to have to think quickly to be able to get through this period. And then also look at what have we planned and how must we restructure and replan that. Just a few extra comments. Thanks, Nikita. I saw your hand is up, so welcome to.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that and can appreciate, the wisdom that's coming from you, Louise. So just to add to that, for us as an industry, we don't highlight enough how important it is for us to also consider the end consumer at hand, right? And the critical part, and love the fact that you brought up the citrus season as an example. Can you imagine the loss of cargo that comes with the time like this? And in terms of that, you're thinking of how many businesses are impacted, how many routes have shut down as a result, how many trade agreements have fallen short of just encouraging the trade that it was meant to enable. And I think now is the time for us to just, as an industry, really push forward, help our exporters, our shippers, etc., increase our engagement around this. So if there is anybody that needs any help with this, I'm sure we'll all be more than welcome to assisting anybody that needs some creative solutions around these matters.
Thank you very much, and some great insights shared. Nikita, I'd like to come back to you later just on some of those examples around innovative things that companies have done. I did love the Apple example and how quickly they responded in terms of using air freight. It was quite inspiring. Okay, we're going to go on to the next question, and I think now bringing it back specifically to Africa, but how can Africa increase intercontinental trade share, and what interventions are needed? I don't know, Peter, if you're comfortable maybe going first on this one. Or...
Happy to, yeah. Yeah, so we obviously come from very different lens to Nikita and Louise, who are very operational day to day, working on this stuff. We come from a collaboration type background, where we recognize that in order to develop our intercontinental trade share, it's critical that we get competitive products to the place where they need to be. So a little bit like I said in the start, but in our sort of assessment of this, since we got going, our view is always to realize that governments across the continent have the same ambitions. They've created initiatives like the NEPAD initiative, the regional blocks and the like. There's obviously then very specific national and bilateral trade agreements. All of them rely on the fact that in order to have these trade agreements translate into transactions and sales, you need to deal with affordability of the product. And all the rhetoric in the reports that are written on this indicate that the cost of transport is such a huge contributor to that cost of the landed good, wherever you're trying to get it from and to. So fundamentally, that's what we need to recognize, that collaboration is key to actually unlocking this. We're dealing with cross-border agreements, multinational agreements. We're dealing with governments. We're dealing with transport service providers. We're dealing with customs authorities. We're dealing with cargo owners, customers. There's a whole variety of people who would be seen to benefit from improving these efficiencies. But the only way to solve it is through collaboration, and that's not easy, So for us, it's about getting those collaborative measures in place where governments can cooperate on the cross-border issues, picking one issue at a time to improve it. And I'll go into details later, but on the specifics again. But it's really about the infrastructure related to get stuff, from A to B. Primarily improvements in cross-border, the customs side of things, and then try to promote the shift from road to rail as a long distance opportunity, and then very importantly dealing with non-tariff barriers, and all the efficiencies related to borders and the like. So that's always been our view, but it can't be done alone. So you need to have the structures in place that are able to adapt, and like Nikita and Louise says, when we have these headwinds, that everybody is able to adapt very quickly, because it's not one single person that can make that change. It's a whole supply chain that needs to adapt, and having those structures in place to make it done more easily and quicker.
Great, thank you. Louise, Nikita, do you want to contribute to that?
I think Peter's has really got it spot on. What is very important is that we do need to realize that under the Africa Trade Continental Agreement, AfTA, we do have an opportunity to look at how we can start trading with each other. And I think it might just be the pivotal point now where we've got to make the decision to say, listen, maybe it is time to look at our neighbors and our partners on the African continent and how we can work together and make this work better for us, and lessen the dependency. And again, I think it's important to look at how the Chinese approached it, again, referring to example, a decision that China made to cancel the Boeing orders potentially could take one of the biggest companies in the world down to its knees. So we always think, we don't have power. And I think, to Peter's point, if we start standing together and we hold hands, we will inevitably have a huge amount more power and pressure that we can exercise. And I think the reality is there's a lot of talk about AGOA, is it going to continue or not? And sadly, my position is it's not going to, and we now need to start preparing for that and realize how are we going to get ourselves into a better position. Is it switching to other markets? Is it maybe going through the NEPAT Foundation to apply more pressure? What should we be doing? But we need to start thinking very strategically of how we can approach it and become friends. If you look at what happened with Mr. Trump and the Ukraine president, they managed to sit down and look each other in the eye after nearly jumping down each other's throat 2 months before. So there is always hope, and I think we must look at those avenues of how we can put both, not South Africa only, but the African continent on a better footing with the US government, and try and leverage whatever power we've got from that perspective. Thank you.
If I can just add a little to that, on my side, to what Louise said about the benefit of just even our position at the moment is we have a rich continent. And to add to what Peter said, in terms of the government, us as a country, I think people don't realize just how much support is out there. And I think that as an industry, as the transport industry, we're really in a fortunate position because we're able to, from a private perspective, piece these little parts together. But if we're speaking quite frankly, South Africa is the gateway to Africa. And we have the infrastructure, we have the vehicles, we have the connections to these different areas. And if we can't get it there by sea, we can get it there by road, we can get it there by air. So we are known to make a plan. You know, everybody says a boer maak 'n plan. So that's the South African nature. We are that way inclined. And we do have these great initiatives and these trade agreements that are in place that businesses can really leverage off of. And now is not the time for us to, you know, cry about it. We have to look at where can we get the most benefit from in terms of our international footprint. We need to start looking at those other regions. Like if it's textile industry, as an example, you want to be looking at areas like the Mauritius is as an example, or the Madagascars, where they are increasing their manufacturing, and look to our local producers and adjust our rates accordingly, because clearly the reliance on these international entities is not the way forward. And we've been pushing African trade for a very long time. Louise and I were speaking about this yesterday. It's a song that we've been singing for so many years. And I think that these trade wars actually put us in a position to really boost our fellow countries and find ways of collaborating. It's just up to the receivers really at this point. But again, I think that once the forum is in place and we set up just a mechanism for the legislative around getting to these other countries and reducing our reliance on them, I'm sure that we'll be able to solve. So it's not doom and gloom for everybody. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, I'm glad how all the panelists put a very positive spin on it. And I remember a talk by a guy called Dominic Giobeppe from the Cohesion Collective a few years ago. And he said, if you just built a wall around Africa, I mean, we've got all the resources and everything we need on the continent. And I'm reading a stat the other day saying in the next 20 years, 1 out of every 4 working individuals in the world will be an African. Just in terms of how young our population and how fast it's growing. So, I mean, there's a lot of positivity around that. And yeah, I think obviously collaboration and trying to really put that African Continental Free Trade Agreement into force now is really going to help us move forward. So we've spoken about some of the opportunities, but what are some of the current kind of barriers as we as a continent are facing in terms of intercontinental trade? I don't know, Nikita, if you want to just expand on what you were just saying, if there are specific things that we need to address if we're going to really unlock trade between African countries.
Of course, yes. So just to bring it in a little bit, because I know sometimes we speak up in the air and it's not always applicable to our everyday lives, and it's sometimes just a pipe dream for us to increase our trade. But some of the things that kind of stop us from doing business within Africa specifically is one of the things I mentioned yesterday was our inefficiencies around our customs borders in the other parts of Africa. It's very difficult for shippers to cost their products. It's a lengthy process as well, so your chances of increased storage costing becomes, you can't even calculate it at, and that it really pushes people away from shipping into certain regions within Africa. And our favorite word, bribery and corruption in South Africa, that is unfortunately a sad reality to the rest of the African countries and also South Africa still. But we've done a little bit better in terms of progressing our systems to a point where there's traceability and very little corruption in terms of the SARS customs process at the moment. So ask for that. And I can also appreciate the fact that some of the countries are replicating our systems, and trying to take learnings from us as a country. So there definitely is progress in terms of how that's working, but it still is a barrier to entry for some of the markets in Africa. Inadequate infrastructure is one of the common themes as well. So we have poor roadways leading up to some of the countries further north into Africa. You also have the political climate to take into account. Like I mentioned, piracy. It is really big in Africa. I was actually having a good laugh, and you think that a pirate looks like Johnny Depp in what is that movie? Pirates of the Caribbean. But no, they're actually, you should see what this looks like. It's little guys on a dinghy boat, and they're coming with these huge guns. So this is the reality of doing business in Africa. And until we get to a point where we can safely trade within these areas, unfortunately, it's still going to be a risk factor for the industry. So really just a time for us to dig a bit deeper. And lastly is poor trade information and market intel. A lot of the companies in Africa, you'll find that they they can boast such a large operation, but you probably can't find them on Google. You can't find them on LinkedIn. You would never even know that they exist until you take a drive there and you realize, oh my gosh, there's this huge operation. So I think we just don't know what's really in the rest of Africa. And I can see there's so many comments in the chat and people that are joining in from different areas like Congo, Ghana, and they could probably sing a different song, right? So yeah, I think this also boils down to digitalization. How are we enabling the rest of these businesses to get on the map so that we can know about their services, So yeah, that's my input on that.
I don't know if any of the other panelists would like to comment further on it.
I think, Joshua, very importantly in terms of AfTA is that we really need to look at the strategic advantages, that we can gain through making use of the AfTA agreement. And I think we definitely need to look at, not a lot of, I don't know how many people on the chat and in this webinar knows about the guided trade initiatives. It's really fantastic opportunities for a quite diverse range of products that can be moved to quite a big range of countries. You can also have a look at the AfTA website. The step downs of the duties are published there. So it is available. You can see that helps with your costing to be able to get surety. The duties are being stepped down over a 10-year period. So you can see what it is next year or the year after to be able to look at building your markets in Africa. So I think definitely Nikita's quite right. I said yesterday, this must happen quickly now. And I think it is the opportunity for us now to grab it and start looking at it as a real business alternative instead of a dream. Thank you, Joshua.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll go on to our next question. Where should we concentrate investment to facilitate trade within the African continent? I don't know, Louise, if you'd like to take this one.
I think I want to pass the ball.
No, you're going to pass it back to Nikita.
But Peter, I'm going to take the prerogative and say ladies first, and I hope we agree. Nikita and Peter touched on it, but I think, and funny enough, there's a lot of talk about one-stop borders and all these kind of things. For me, it is really about no-stop borders. That's the ultimate aim. But in order for us to get to, instead of building a big building as a border post, why don't we take that money and actually invest it in the road? And I think Peter's going to agree with me here. I think it is very important that we look at our corridor development strategy, how we can link multimodal. I see Marcus on the call. multimodal transport things, road, rail, and I think also air. We tend to forget about air in Africa because we think it's too expensive, but it is definitely an opportunity to start off, with low volumes and everything. But we've got to get our railway infrastructure up and running, and we've got to get our corridors up and running, and we've got to get our roads sorted. That is where every single cent that we've got spare has got to go, because that's the only way we're going to be able to facilitate this. And I think Peter mentioned the cost. Peter, help me here, but I think transport costs in Africa is about 20%, between 20 and 30% of your total cost. If we can bring that down to between 15 to 10%, just imagine how much potential we can unlock. Thanks, Joshua. Over to you.
Yeah, just to build on Louise, exactly what you said is 100% what I would have said. I think, in the day, all of these trade routes are corridors, and each corridor has its own specifics. We have focused on the north-south corridor and the Maputo corridors as the ones that we think need a bit of support. And everybody looks at the investment projects. I think often in these cases, there's not a lot of investment necessarily required just to get better understanding of where the bottlenecks are. And typically the solutions could be quite low capex, like Louise says. It's just about getting more efficiencies at the points where they are getting choked, and typically it's where the border posts are. So that can come down to very low cost interventions in the digital space, in the trade space, in the custom space, that will have a huge impact, certainly on the road traffic. Then we strongly believe investment in rail is critical. We're quite pragmatic about what we think is necessary. I think a new build rail is expensive. It's going to be difficult, but there's a lot of existing railway lines that are not being used optimally. And in order to enable those, again, it's multi-stakeholders, it's multiple rail authorities working across their own jurisdictions that need to work together to move a box from one point to another. So a lot of work's been done in this space. It's now just turning those investment plans into reality. And the infrastructure investment in the rail space, what we've seen, is not necessarily building railway lines. It's putting rolling stock. It's about trains and wagons. It's about developing the handling facilities to enable intermodal type arrangements where the rail does the long haul and the road does the short haul. So I think a lot of these things are well known. It's just trying to get the right structures in place that we can make those investments a reality, because it is, like I say, it's a very sovereign space with many countries involved in order to manage that. Maybe just the ports are important. I think we've discussed that, but I just take it as read that one of the biggest challenges we have, certainly in the South African context, is unchoking our ports, because that's becoming a major issue. And then our big hobby horse is just around corridor management generally. So again, it's not a big investment. It's about having structures in place where there's somebody with a day-to-day responsibility of monitoring the data, understanding how performance is moving, and be able to react and to ensure that from a day-to-day point of view, any changes in the supply chain can be managed through the stakeholders that have the ability to move it. And that doesn't require big investment, it just requires commitment. These are things, again, our governments do want them. They have moved towards having them. But I think the urgency from the private sector is way more serious, because they impact it from a day-to-day basis. And it's really about seeing how we can get the private sector to unlock the ability to have these corridor management structures in place to on a day-to-day basis, just to ensure that we have efficient transport across our corridors. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Peter. Nikita, a question for you. How can we coordinate intermodal transport to reduce bottlenecks and delays?
Thanks for the question again. So really, at a long term, I think that Peter's kind of summed it up in terms of what infrastructure needs to be developed, what are the priorities from government and the input that's required from the private sector. Just to add to that, there was the RFI that was released by government for input from the private sector, and also the funding that government wants to give the private sector to assist them in bettering what we're currently doing, right? So what I love about this so much is that government's openly said that, guys, we don't know and we don't have all of the answers. Please give us information. Tell us what we need to do. We're prepared to fund these projects. So I can appreciate the fact that that's already underway. Just to touch on what Peter said, you know, the willingness is there, which is something that people don't really shine enough light on in terms of our government nationally. We need to, again, I'm going to touch on smarter logistics, more innovative logistics. As Louise said, it's become a critical time for warehouses, bonded facilities, etc. You know, while these things are changing, it's important for shippers to choose partners who are capable of also keeping their cargo until such a point where you know, things become certain. It doesn't have to be a complete discarded product, like we were saying, you know, you can't stop oranges from growing, can you? But you can certainly stage and stagger the delivery of your goods. So this period is requiring smarter logistics. It's wanting us to think out of the box. It also is a time for us to re-look at our information sharing with different entities, right? So often people keep things close to their chest. I'm a big believer that you shouldn't. You should use your platform to kind of spread a certain message. And platforms like this, the Transport Evolution as an example, it's a to share best practices on what works, you know, engage with one another and get help if it's needed. I did pop my details down in the chat as well. If there's anybody that needs any help with strategizing, please reach out. I haven't been in the industry for as long as some of my colleagues, but if I don't have the answers, I can certainly refer them. But it is a time for us to network, for us to share knowledge and expertise. And in closing of that question, I think just again, digitalization. We need access to data. We need access to options. So the forum is going to be a great platform for us to also begin that. And I think once that gets set up, I'm sure we'll be in a much better position.
Thanks, Nikita. Louise, see your hands raised.
I think Nikita touched on a very, very important point, is collaboration. You know, I don't know what it is. You can just phone a friend or ask a friend. Very, very, very important. And I don't know, for some unknown reason, in Africa, we think we must reinvent the wheel instead of just looking what wheel is working and using it. I see we've got a colleague here from Kenya, and I'm often amazed at what the East African community has been able to do through talking to each other and collaborating. I mean, if you look at what Mombasa Port, I would say not less than 10 years ago, looked like and what it looks like today, how you can actually run your cargo from Mombasa on a railway line straight into Nairobi, warehousing space being developed in Nairobi, which actually has created opportunities and business opportunities. And very, very importantly, look at what is working and what is practically on the ground. You know, there's one thing Peter referred to, policy. Second thing is what really works on the ground. And let's host these kind of discussion points where we can say, you know, something like tracking, you know, how can we make tracking work? Some of my colleagues that's on the call, you know, how can we make intermodal work better? What is the stumbling blocks that we can take it from the bottom up and then inform the policyholders to say, this is where we can make both short, medium, and longer term, because what we've got to realize, Rome wasn't built in a day. Nikita, I love you. A boer maak 'n plan is really true, because we do make a plan. But we've also got to adopt a little bit of the Chinese attitude that we've got to plan for 50 years and not for 2 years. And I think that's one of the areas where we've got to take the success stories. We're not good at beating our own drum. We're not good at telling the world what successes we've had. And I think those are the things that we can also learn across the region and from the various regional areas, you know, what has worked, what hasn't worked, and what can we adopt very quickly. And I think that is going to be critically, because we don't have the money all the time to actually invest now in greenfields, research projects, all of those. We're going to have to move very, very quickly. Thanks, Joshua.
Thank you. And I think you've touched on something important. So I'm going to press you with a follow-up question to what you've just said. And maybe Nikita and Peter, if they'd like to chip in. But I mean, we've spoken a lot about what's not working in terms of the lack of infrastructure and around some of the problems with custom and border control and security and safety of transport modes. But are there good stories, good examples, like you've just touched on with the East African bloc, of where it is working, where public-private partnerships are being effective, where there seems to be good progress being made in terms of unlocking trade? Again, both intercontinentally, but also internationally.
Yeah,
I
happy
Josh,
to.
Yeah, go. It's now.
Yeah, so again, you know, I think there's a lot of stuff that's going on that we generally aren't aware of, and I think part of the challenge is that a lot of the movements take place very slowly, so it's hard for people to stay on the journey with those that are doing them. So, you know, from a trade perspective, we've spoken already about the AFCFTA. There's also the SADC FTA. There's various trade agreements that are there to be used. I don't necessarily know that people are fully aware of them and how to utilize them. So that's probably an information gap that could be utilized as an opportunity. And then let's just say from a SADC point of view, I know that there's a lot of focus from them on corridors and on trade barriers. You know, so historically we've hosted the SADC Business Council and supported them quite a bit in that space. So a lot of work and opportunity to resolve non-tariff barriers. Obviously challenges around capacity of just the people in place to be able to resolve them. Perfect systems, but just not enough people to really drive them. So there's opportunity to support those types of initiatives. Then trade corridors are becoming increasingly important in the SADC context. And I know certainly at the last heads of state summit, this came up as a very key point, and the SADC has been mandated to really drive the North-South corridor going forward as a corridor that they want to improve. So, you know, I think on the surface, you know, there is good political support to do these, acknowledging, of course, that timelines are a lot slower. So what I would say is that there's a lot of fingers that tend to be pointed towards governments, but private sector itself needs to be organized in order to make these things a reality. So again, we've said collaboration a few times, but you know, a matching system needs to be in place where the relevant regional companies, organizations, business organizations are working together to inform what governments are doing. And I guess that's been an area that we've tried to support, is just get the business guys together to have a common view and a common vision, which I don't think there has been. I think there's been quite a few dispersed and different views depending on everyone's individual experience of trade across the continent. So there's a lot going on, obviously not at the pace that we would all like, but I guess it's for us to be aware of it and see how we can push it as fast as we can.
Good. Okay, well, I see we've got a few questions in the Q&A. So I'm going to just start with Christian's question, which is directed at you, Peter. Given recent reports that former US President Donald Trump may influence or advocate changes in South Africa's domestic policy framework, particularly regarding trade and investment, how is the NAPAD Business Foundation preparing to engage with evolving US-Africa trade relations? And what role can public-private partnerships play in safeguarding regional integration and the African Continental Free Trade Agreement agenda? So it's quite a mouthful of a question.
Yeah. So just to be clear, I mean, we haven't been focusing on what's going on. I mean, we've been very much on infrastructure focus, but I think what we're seeing playing out and is very much a government-to-government type engagement. We've always had the view that the business is done between business people. So there needs to be engagement between American and South African businesses to understand how they're being impacted in a trade view. So they can lobby on each side of the table to make sure that we get a result that is friendly to business and not just driven down from a government point of view. It's obviously not simple, and I know that certainly that a lot of our business associations in South Africa will already be looking at that. Whether we want to make it more broader and try to do it as a region, that's probably a little bit more complex. But this won't just have implications in a one-way direction. It's definitely going to have implications in two ways. And business needs to stand up and really start to elevate what these issues are, so the government can make the right decisions on both sides.
Good. I'm just looking through some of these questions. We've got a bit of a contentious one, so I don't know if my panelists will be willing to answer it, but it has come up obviously a lot during this webinar around the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and the potential that it has. But the question is it really working? And if yes, what are the real progressive indicators showing that? So again, I don't know if anyone would like to comment.
I'll jump in first.
I can. Oh. I think Louise and I need to have a private call when we're done. Go for it, Louise.
I think the real answer is, regrettably, is it working? No. And that's for me the sad reality, because has it got the potential to work? The answer is yes. Is it working? No. And to unpack why it's not working is probably a seminar on its own. But I think part of the problem is these non-trade barriers. People don't understand it. They think it's impossible. And I really think we need to start looking at those. Nikita?
Yeah, let me add for you. So just, and there's another question that ties into this, that was asked by December Ndlela. And I would just like to share a little bit of why I say this. You get companies like the Mr. Price Group, right? I'm sure everybody's familiar with Mr. Price, that are really doing their best to promote manufacturing in South Africa, as an example, and piggybacking off these trade agreements, right? So they are doing their best to export into different African countries, but their reliance at the moment will still always be on the more overseas countries, for the mere fact that there's still cost saving in other areas So it's not so much the duties and the VAT, it becomes the transport costing. To ship a container out of China and the cost of the physical product does not justify doing business in Africa. So it still does not quantify to the cost saving at the moment that you get from importing from a place like China, as an example. And I don't mean this directed at Mr. Price Group directly, but this is just the general feel. So like Louise said, does it have the potential to work? Absolutely. But we need to now become smarter in our costing, smarter in our sourcing, smarter in our logistics operations so that we can now bring those costs down to be able to play in a market. I'm going to use a very simple example of the price of bread. If you go to the store, you pay about $20 for a loaf of bread, right? Can you imagine us saying tomorrow that, okay, we're going to be paying $40 for the bread now? And that's the direct implication of doing, of not capitalizing on Africa trade. Until we increase our volume into Africa, there is no justification for bringing the transport rate down. There is no justification for low cost production because the volumes just don't permit. So the long and short of this is that we have to increase, we have to suffer it out a bit and really try it out to get to a place where it becomes profitable for companies to trade within these agreements, right? And to answer the question that this gentleman raised about how do little fish play in this ocean, like Louise said, unfortunately with that, that's also something that people don't just share openly, right? Because they want to maintain a competitive edge. But you have people like Louise, like a Peter as an example, and like myself, that really just want to help the industry. So again, I'm going to say this, I'm sure I speak on behalf of all of the panelists in saying this, if anybody needs any guidance at all, we are all open to information sharing, you know, and putting you guys in the right place to grow. And it does not necessarily mean that you can't participate in these larger markets as a small fish. If anything, you have more of an advantage because a lot of these guys are setting their trade agreements, they're setting their sourcing patterns, and you have the agility to be able to say, well, I'm going to kind of change where everybody looks to and maybe start looking at alternative regions. So yeah, that was a loaded answer, but I hope that helps.
That's great. Thank you. I think you've helped tick off all the questions that we had. So thanks for that. Louise?
Joshua, now after the excitement cough attack, I'm
I did
back.
put you on the spot.
And Nikita, thank you for stepping in so quickly. I did see a mention about the time release study that was launched today between South Africa and Lesotho. Very well done to both SARS and LRA for launching that study. Very importantly, and I think this is again, it comes back to the concept of partnership. We need to look at what comes out of the time release study to tell us where is the bottlenecks and where we can do things better. Because on a small scale, we can actually improve things quite quickly by just tweaking certain things. And again, it comes back to the AFTA discussion. I really think the example of East Africa is phenomenal. The work that they've done there has been incredible. You know, 10 years ago, people didn't ship to Mombasa because they knew, you know, out of 10 containers, they will lose 2 or never find them. Nikita referred to Mr. Price. They probably had a few of those containers going missing. You know, where today you can ship there, people are making decisions to actually ship to Mombasa sadly, instead of coming to South Africa because of the efficiencies that's been included in there. So to loop back to AFTA, the potential is there. I think what we as business people need to do, and it loops back into what Peter said, business people must start talking to business people, and we must look at the opportunities. You can't tell me that there's not a need for oranges in Africa. I don't believe it. You know, there's a lot of things that we produce here that there's a demand for. You know, having been in Europe recently and seeing what you pay for a single apple there, I mean, something like €5, and then you get an apple that doesn't even taste as nice as our apples. You know, we've got both the fresh produce and the other value add produce. We've got somebody from the Lesotho Textile Exporters Association on here. Lesotho is doing incredibly well with their textile exports. Also, again, incredibly well with setting up a manufacturing industry around that. And that should be able to go. We've got a young population in Africa. Things like tackies, jeans, all T-shirts, all those kind of things are things that can drive this inter-Africa trade. And I think we just need to put our shoulder to the wheel and get cracking on that. Thanks, Joshua.
Thanks. Nikita, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I just want to give just to add to what Louise said about Lesotho, just bring it home a little. But funny enough, there was a study that was done and some stats that were released. We conducted this a few years ago, but to my absolute shock, one of the largest imported commodities into the Lesotho region was Levi jeans. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I really own many Levi jeans for that matter. They're quite pricey. So could you imagine the fact that it was the highest imported textile for one, and we could probably manufacture that at a cheaper cost. And I love the fact that Lesotho's also piggybacked off that, right? There's no way that you're going to tell me that importing Levi jeans all the way from the USA is more cheaper than us making it ourselves. So we also need to hone in on the opportunities that exist around us. And the reality of the situation is they really are there. And if we can marry or mirror the approach that Lesotho takes, wow, there's so much opportunity. We just covered a story about our wind turbines. We actually have facilities in South Africa that are equipped to build a similar technology, maybe not of scale, but we certainly have the expertise. Have we tapped into that market? No, we haven't. We're still importing those goods. So it really is up to, like Peter said, it's up to everybody now to also aid government in aiding us.
Yeah. Great point.
Thanks, Josh.
Peter.
Yeah, I'm sure you're looking to close shortly, but just to deal with the technology side of things. Look, I'm no expert on what tech's available and what works and what doesn't work. I think you can take it as read that there's plenty of tech available that may have a massive impact. The point I really wanted to make is it needs a home, and one of the biggest challenges we have in cross-border issues is that there needs to be a body in place that takes ownership of those, choosing what tech to use and how to manage the data that comes out of it. And that's really one of the challenges I think that we have in tech deployment as opposed to the tech being available. It's just getting a mandated body that can start to work with it. And it also goes a little bit to the finance question that was on the rail side. You know, a lot of work goes in upfront into getting the perfect institutional setup before anyone's looked at the actual project itself to see if it's viable. So it's all about just getting something in place to start testing solutions in order to get momentum. Then you start to get things moving, but it does need to have a mandated body at the core of it.
And Nikita and Louise, I don't know, because I see two people obviously ask questions around technology and smart logistics and advances and how that can help in terms of reducing congestion and improving international and interregional trade. Do you have any comments or case studies, examples that, in terms of how technology is assisting in that respect?
I think, it loops back, and I see one of the colleagues posted that there was just been a study released on no-stop borders. If we look, and this is a drum I have to beat, at what SARS has done with digitizing our customs processes, we've moved away from being able to do these things 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So if we can take that kind of approach, look at the low-hanging fruit Peter was referring to, there's a lot of tech solutions. There is, we don't have to go and reinvent the wheel and write something new and, start from the beginning. Take what's there, look at a cloud-based solution that you can bring down the cost around it, and then leverage it. And I fully agree with what Peter's also saying. It doesn't have to be a perfect world. Let's become innovative and really try and test things, because unless we do that, we're just going to get fall further and further behind. It is critically important that we look at using technology to bridge all these paper gaps, and do away with all the paper that we currently have and break those processes down. It's absolutely critical that we as business demand that from the customs authorities, and their SARS has done a really good job. And in the region, also some incredible work that's being done, and we just need to knock harder and be a little bit more demanding, because ultimately it's a partnership. But if we don't tell our partner what we want and what we need, they're not going to know about it. So I definitely think we need to get closer to each other, and we need to say what is important for us, and what is the focus area in influence the strategy and where the money is spent. So
yeah,
thank you.
Thank you.
And then just to add to that, sorry, to what Louise said, and I can see the questions you were referring to, Joshua. So outside of digital progression, the reality is we also have to deal with what we have at the moment, right? And we can't solely be reliant on digital systems and advances, etc. It's also about partnering with the right people. And it may sound a bit cliche coming from somebody who's been in commercial for God knows how many years, but I truly mean that when I say that, when you have people that are at your side that are going to be able to show you how to map out your routes a little bit better. And when I say that, as an example, we had a customer that wanted to call on, I think it was one of the ports in Sudan. I forget the name. And there was a period where they weren't calling that specific port because of the Red Sea, the issues within the Red Sea, right? And you've got to get dynamic with that. As an example, we knew that we could probably call Egypt a little bit easier than we could call the direct ports. And so we had to transship from one port to another. Now, there is no system that can tell you that. That comes with years of experience, that comes with having your ear to the ground, being in touch with what's going on in the industry, and just knowing really what's happening, what works, what doesn't. And so critical for good partnerships, critical to get involved in forums like this, so that you could have that, that information sharing. And you find that it's so funny because shippers are so reluctant to give you information, and we really want to help, So please, I'm going to encourage everybody again, reach out. We can help you guys. Many of us have been in the industry for many years, and we could probably help you with a thing or two. The answer isn't entirely digitalization and technology. It also comes from partnerships, good old communication.
Okay. Well, I think we're going to start wrapping up now. So just as a closing, I'm just going to go around to the panelists and ask them for some closing remarks. So Peter, I don't know if you're comfortable to go first.
Happy to, and very brief. We committed to improving transport corridors, and our view is that we need to get corridor management structures in place, and we're happy to work with anybody that has an interest in that. It is a challenging environment, so any support, be it from an information point of view, capacity point of view, it's always extremely well welcomed. And thanks again for putting this all together.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Nikita.
Oh, goodness. I think I've my brain capacity for the day. Just a really big thank you to the Transport Evolution. I know I keep saying it, but this is my second webinar with you guys, and I've learned so much, and I've just opened myself up to amazing people. So thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm really looking forward to Transport Evolution Conference next month, and excited to engage with everybody after this call. Again, I'm going to extend myself. My details are in the chat box. If anybody needs anything, please reach out, and thank you so much for just a wonderful series of events.
Thank you very much. Louise.
I fully agree with Nikita. I think, and it loops back to my comment around being able to share information, create awareness about initiatives and everything. So thank you to the Transport Forum. I think this is an idea that started, if I remember, about a year ago. I think I was on the first panel. This is something that we can do on a more regular basis, and also more specialized groups. I see we've got a gentleman from the dangerous goods area. That's probably an area we all run away from. But it is really a fantastic initiative, and thank you for hosting this. And I think we can work very well together to see the nice spread of all the colleagues. It's wonderful to see from where you are. Please keep listening and sharing your ideas, because this way we can work together, share knowledge, and we can move the continent forward. So thank you, Joshua. And to Nikita and Peter, thank you for being part of a wonderful panel. Thank you.
Well, thank you to all the panelists. It's been a really insightful and interactive and engaging. I've never had so many questions, I think, on a webinar before. So it just showed how much value people got from the session, and so thank you to everyone. Just to remind everyone, as we've been speaking about, this is all part of the Transport Evolution Africa series leading up to the event, which will take place at Gallagher Convention Centre from the 17th to the 19th of June. For more information, if you'd like to exhibit, sponsor, visit, you can go to the website, which is www.transportevolution.com. That's www.transportevolution.com. And you would have seen the boxes come up now. So if you'd like to indicate whether you are interested in getting in touch regarding either exhibiting, sponsorship, booking to attend the conference, we'll be talking around topics like this in greater detail, or attending as a visitor, please do let us know. I think we'll close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And with that, I'm very happy to close the webinar. So thank you everyone for attending, and we look forward to seeing you at the event in June.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye all. Take care.
From my side, I'd just like to say thank you to everyone for joining. It really has been a pleasure sharing the topic of intermodal transport with you. Before we wrap up, I'd like to extend my gratitude to our moderator, Joshua Low, and our guest speakers, Nikita Reddy, Peter Van Dal, and Louise Wiggett, for an engaging panel discussion. As Joshua said, if you're interested in hearing more about the forum and the Expo, you can visit the website at transportevolution.com. It was also shared in the chat for your convenience. And with that, I'd like to bid you all farewell. Thank you very much for your time, and goodbye.